A few moments ago I said that our military is in disarray. Few might agree, but few probably have these facts. First of all, the United States possesses the world's best air defense radar. It's called the OTHB, for the Over-the-Horizon Backscatter Radar. It cost $1.4 billion and took 20 years to develop. It can see Soviet bombers as far away as 2,000 miles and was billed as the cornerstone of North America's air defense network. The Air Force built 2 OTHB radars, one in Maine and the other on the West Coast. The Air Force decided to shut down both of them due to tight budgets and the so-called end of the Cold War. The Maine congressional delegation lobbied to keep the Maine radar operational. The Air Force agreed, but only 40 hours a week. Now they can assure the American people that if Soviet bombers head our way during business hours, they won't stand a chance. Or maybe they will stand a chance. We have very few interceptors and no surface-to-air missiles guarding the continental United States. I said no surface-to-air missiles. No SAMs guarding the continental United States. Secondly, the Navy has decided not to fully arm the long-range ballistic missiles carried aboard some of its new Trident submarines because of a shortage of its most powerful nuclear warheads. Thus, for the very first time, the Navy is sending its most modern and lethal submarines to sea without a full complement of 192 warheads. Thirdly, the Pentagon has halted round-the-clock flights of the planes that serve as the key wartime link between the President and the United States nuclear submarine fleet. Since the early 1960s, 2 of these planes have been airborne at all times, one over the Atlantic and one over the Pacific. According to the Pentagon, the planes have been grounded due to lack of money and the declining Soviet threat. In the event of nuclear war, the President would need those planes to order our submarine fleet to retaliate. In addition, about a year ago, the Air Force announced that it would no longer keep its airborne nuclear command post flying 24 hours a day. Fourthly, the Air Force has begun dismantling its fleet of Minuteman II missiles, even though they are pessimistic that the START treaty to cut long-range missiles will be signed. The new small ICBM now under development is not expected to be ready until the late 1990s, and that's just too late. The U.S. will rely on a force of 500 Minuteman IIIs and 50 MX Peacekeepers. Fifthly, the Soviets have so many nuclear weapons that even after the START treaty, they will still have a first strike capability against the United States. In fact, according to a secret CIA report, the Soviets will still be able to destroy the entire U.S. silo-based ICBM force after cutting their force of SS-18s in half, as mandated by the START treaty. Sixth, the Soviet Union is building a new radar station in the Far East to replace the illegal radar station near Krasnoyarsk. The new station will be a large phased array radar capable of providing early warning of missile attack and coordinating ballistic missile defenses. Seventh, I would like to bring to your attention something I have been aware of for many years. As you know, there are Soviet submarines off the east and west coasts of the North American continent. They are armed with submarine-launched ballistic missiles which can attack military bases and cities throughout this country. As I have meditated upon these submarines, especially on occasions when I've been directly overlooking the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean, I have seen that the Soviets did not plan to launch all of those missiles into the air to attack military bases. Instead, they planned to launch some of them underwater into the continental shelf, deep beneath the surface of the waters. The purpose of such an attack would be to trigger cataclysm along the length of the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. This has always been a part of what I have seen on the inner. I've taken it for granted for at least a decade, if not more. Recently, what I have seen has been confirmed. I have learned through a knowledgeable source that a Soviet scientist now in this nation has confirmed that this type of missile is under development in the Soviet Union and will be fully operational and on station in these submarines within 24 months. There is one way we can turn back, in time, the prophecies for the 1990s that, clear as clear can be, are written as the handwriting on the wall. There are systems that are being developed in the United States that can easily shoot down ICBMs, any and all ICBMs coming in from the Soviet Union, China, or any other nuclear nation. For starters, there are the Arrow, Iris, and Head-Eye systems. There's also the space-based Brilliant Pebbles system. We need to deploy Iris, Head-Eye, and Brilliant Pebbles right now. Even the Patriot would work as a stopgap measure. Head-Eye is an anti-ballistic missile, an ABM, that destroys warheads as they re-enter the atmosphere. It could defend our cities and military bases. Iris is an ABM that destroys warheads in space. It could defend much of North America from one site in the center of the country and two on the coasts. Brilliant Pebbles are thousands of small space-based non-nuclear missiles. These could hit ICBMs as they travel through space. This system would cost $75 or $80 billion to deploy. That's expensive, but it's cheaper than losing one city. Strategic defense could decrease the need to deploy expensive offensive systems. Ultimately, we could cut the defense budget with this system in place. According to one study, this three-layered defense would be 93% effective against a full-scale Soviet ICBM attack. With this in place, the Soviets might never launch their surprise attack because the losses would outweigh the benefits. This is my peace plan, a solid defense. There are peak dates during the decade when astrology shows that war is more likely: 1988 to 1991, then January 1994. That could be plus or minus 2 years, and 1998 to 2000. On January 11, 1994, the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Moon, Mars, Uranus, Neptune will form a tight mega-conjunction between 17 and 26 degrees Capricorn. I can't even remember when there has been a 7-planet mega-conjunction. Every configuration has a period of time in which its effects may be felt. They are not necessarily manifest on the day of the conjunction. This mega-conjunction may be felt, as I've said, for about 2 years, or perhaps 1 to 2 years before and after January 11, 1994. War could happen any time. We should not rely on astrology alone. We should rely on our communion with Almighty God and with the Christ presence that is with us. I believe that we must not be reluctant to examine these facts. When we hold steady with a philosophy of realism, when we're willing to look at the problem, we can direct the power of God into every problem, personal and planetary, and dissolve them at their point of origin. We have to realize that spiritual defense goes hand in hand with physical defense. I am not for more armaments and weapons. God knows we have plenty. What we are short on is the ability to stop incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, or bombers from the Soviet Union, or let loose by any other madman from any third world country. So what is the Soviet Union's position on the New World Order? The Soviets don't necessarily buy into it. The Western power elite is using them. The Soviets are playing along, but they have their own agenda. The long-term Soviet goal is world domination, with no power sharing among the United States, Europe, or Japan. They intend to accomplish this by a simultaneous nuclear first strike on the United States and a conventional invasion of Europe. That is their plan. It has been in place since the end of World War II. Glasnost and perestroika notwithstanding, this is the plan of the Soviet military, and this is what Saint Germain has told us. My prophecy for the 1990s is that the Soviet agenda has not changed since the conclusion of World War II, and that they will attack Europe and the United States unless the United States puts up a strategic defense and does so at once. Why do I believe that a first strike is still the Soviet goal? When starting with Saint Germain on Thanksgiving 1986, Saint Germain warned, "You have every reason to believe, to be concerned, and to be prepared for a first strike by the Soviet Union on these United States. Therefore, secure the underground shelters, preserve the food, and prepare to survive. And if it be an exercise proven unneeded, then bless God that it did not go unheeded." Saint Germain's philosophy is that a nation that is prepared psychologically, physically, mentally, and spiritually will not experience war. We may think we are prepared spiritually. Personally, I think even this is in question. But we are definitely not prepared physically, and that is our Achilles heel. In addition, Czechoslovakian General Jan Šejna, the highest-ranking member of the Soviet military apparatus ever to defect, says that a nuclear first strike on the United States is the cornerstone of Soviet strategy. I have interviewed him on my talk show, Summit University Forum, and discussed all of this in much detail. Although the Soviets signed the INF Treaty and the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty, and they are negotiating the START Treaty, they are still pursuing their agenda. These treaties are a farce. Lenin said over and over again, history suggests that peace is a respite for another war. Lenin saw a tactical retreat as a means of gaining strength to fulfill long-term goals. In 1918, Lenin cut a deal to get Russia out of World War I. It was called the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. Russians thought the terms of the treaty were humiliating. It forced the Bolsheviks to give up an enormous amount of territory and recognize the independence of Poland, the Baltic states, Georgia, and the Ukraine. Lenin answered his critics by saying, "The history of war shows, as clear can be, that the signing of a treaty after defeat is a means of gaining strength." Lenin said that the Bolsheviks would get all the lost territory back, and they did, most of it before World War II. What can we do to prevent a Soviet first strike on the United States? We must do our spiritual work, of course, but we must also see to it that our government deploys a strategic defense. Does anyone here think that merely by meditation and drawing down the light, you can stand in the way of a Soviet Scud or a Soviet ICBM and not be destroyed in its wake? You would think that people in America think that today, the way they go around with their positive thinking, their positive talk. I don't believe that any one of us alive today has that much spiritual attainment. And I think if we did, we wouldn't be here. We'd be ascended masters. And I don't believe that an ascended master is going to place his electronic presence, his ascended master light body in the way of an incoming ICBM. Why then is it so hard for Americans and the American leadership to catch on to the Soviets' long-term goals? It's because we refuse to think the way they think. The Soviets have an Oriental mentality. They are students of the great Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu taught all warfare is based on deception. Therefore, when capable, feign incapacity. When active, inactivity. Offer the enemy a bait to lure him. Feign disorder and strike him. Pretend inferiority and encourage his arrogance. When he is united, divide him. Attack where he is unprepared. Sally out when he does not expect you. When capable, feign incapacity. When active, inactivity. This is the philosophy of the Soviet military. Make no bones about it. When the chips are down, the military is in control of the Soviet Union. Another reason why Americans do not understand the equation of East-West politics is because they have never understood that our own president and many of those at the top of our government are part of what Saint Germain calls the international capitalist communist conspiracy. East and West are working together to subjugate the peoples of the world. This is the key, the missing link in the awareness of Americans as they watch George Bush perform but don't understand his modus operandi. I have urged all Americans to build fallout shelters. We have no other insurance except prayer that will guarantee our survival in nuclear war. Whether it's the Soviets, a Saddam Hussein, or a Chernobyl, the threat is there, and the threat is increasing as more and more nations get the nuclear weapons and the long-term rockets. We buy life insurance, fire insurance, accident insurance, auto insurance, catastrophic health insurance. So why not be self-insured against a nuclear warhead falling in your own backyard? Everything I have recounted to you today is intended to make you realize that the New World Order is not for the common people of America and the world. Light bearers of the world, the New World Order is not for you, and it's not for me. The New World Order is for the power elite, and they are moving towards it inexorably with nobody standing in their way. Wake up, America! Wake up, planet Earth! Martin E. Mahler summed up the wages of failing to take a stand for the common people and against the power elite every time they move against us. He said, "In Germany they came first for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, and I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time, no one was left to speak up." As I pointed out earlier in my delivery to you, you see the brotherhood of Arabs and of Islam. You see the brotherhood of the Jews. It is worldwide, caring for one another, supporting one another, helping each other go into business, directing their capital and their investments toward one another. Where is the brotherhood of Christians? It is divided, it is segmented, it is splintered into many sects of religion, many aspects of politics, many private interests. You do not see that brotherhood. The Keepers of the Flame Fraternity is a worldwide brotherhood of light bearers. It is Saint Germain's fraternity. He desires to personally sponsor its members in the Guru-Chela relationship, and he uses the fraternity and its lessons to do so. As you serve the Master, he serves you. The light bearers of this world are intended to be operating under the sponsorship and the mantle of Saint Germain and Portia. Those of us who are here and understand just how great is the meaning of Saint Germain's presence in our lives need to convey what we know about Saint Germain to all whom we meet who are on a spiritual path. Saint Germain asks no one to give up their church, their religion, their particular teacher, their books. You can be a member of any church and still be a member of the Keepers of the Flame fraternity. It is a fraternal order of sons and daughters of God keeping the flame of life on earth. We need to see, as Benjamin Franklin said, that if we don't hang together, we will all assuredly hang separately. My prophecy is that if we allow the power elite of the US and the USSR to join forces to put their new world order in place, there is no hope for civilization. It will simply become a complete, totalitarian, one-world government. The power elite consider themselves to be the shapers of the destiny of mankind. As one individual on the inside told me, "Make no mistake, they think they own you. Yes, and they consider you and me to be their property. But we don't have to accept it, because we have a mighty I Am presence, we have a holy Christ self, and we know it. We have access to all the power of the Godhead. And do you know what? The power elite don't. They have lost their tie to God during thousands of years in which they have been betraying His people. The only way they can take power from the people is to fool the people as they play politics and use the same old rhetoric that catches us, well, some of the time, but not all of the time. As they use the media and the press to divide and conquer us, to set light bearer against light bearer in the new age. The four horsemen are riding today. I see them. I cannot shield my eyes from them. Who are they? They are harbingers, but they are not evil. They are sent by God to deliver karma in our time, 25,800 years worth in this decade through April 22, 2002. Karma is a restraining force. Do you all realize that? When karma descends on the power elite and the planet as a whole, it restrains their wickedness because they become weighted down by their returning karma. In a sense, karma is a blessing in disguise because it holds up the forward movement of the seed of the wicked's one-world superstate. So not only do the four horsemen deliver the karma of the common people, but they also deliver the karma of the power elite. And so we have heard today in our dictations from Saint Germain from Helios that the judgment descends again upon them. The four horsemen, not only do they deliver the karma of the light bearers, but they also deliver the karma of the fallen ones. Therefore, this is our opportunity to conquer ourselves and our own karma, and to say to them, "Thus far and no farther, you shall not pass. You shall not come between me and my God." Now is the time for the judgment of the power elite. The ride of the four horsemen can put the brakes on their agenda, and we can yet ride the winds of Aquarius to independence from totalitarian control in church and state. Yes, George Bush, Mikhail Gorbachev, we don't want your new world order. And this day, July 4th, 1991, we declare our independence from you and your schemes of power and control. I say to all of you, light bearers of the world, unite. I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon and the second half of our lecture. I'd like to invite you to sing America Awake, I Am That I Am, number 698. Please stand for this song. America awake, I am that I am. 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 Awake, awake. America awake, I am that I am. America awake, I am that I am. Left, right, America, we must let Christ command. Awake, arise, America, we come to take a stand. Just as in ancient days, awake, will not be saved. I am the arm of the Lord, God's freedom to defend. Marching with the hosts of light, our freedom's now at hand. Our victory sure, we trust in God, He's always in command. America, wake up. number 700.
Stump, 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 stump. Mother's something for the coming revolution. To bring the word, spoken word, raising mankind to a higher revolution, higher consciousness away. Coming forth to save the nations and their people. Give back the name, the iron name. Show that Christ is in each heart, in every temple. In each man God does reign. We are something all across the land. With the iron name at our command. We the people living ever free, forging our identity. By our masters of the all have come united. To Saint Germain, the violet flame, gaining freedom through that flame of transmutation. No shackles will remain. We are moving onward in the light of freedom. As one in heart, we now start to rekindle souls of true and noble people who know the grace of God. We are stomping all across the land with the iron name at our command. We the people living ever free, forging our identity. From the country and the world the truth will carry. Through rain and snow, and sun we go, with the message of our own beloved memorial. To let my people go. Tribes of Israel united claim the kingdom. The prophecy must come to be, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. Lord Shiva, cut them free. We are something all across the land, with the iron name at our command. We the people living ever free, forging our identity. We are something all across the land, with the iron name at our command. We the people living ever free, forging our identity. We the people living ever free, forging our
Hail Saint Germain! 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 Let's sing 701, Saint Germain's marching song.
Hail Saint Germain, hail Saint Germain, hail Saint Germain, Saint Germain. Oh, hail the dawn of freedom. Oh, hail the dawn of freedom. Hail Saint Germain, hail Saint Germain, hail Saint Germain, Saint Germain. Oh, hail the Knight Commander. Oh, hail the Knight Commander. Oh, Saint Germain, our noble King, let freedom's bells their message ring in every heart throughout the land. The threefold flame expand its land.
another song here. Number 726. Don't be shy about making fiats to Saint Germain today. Together. Goddess of Liberty! Hail, Goddess of Liberty! Hail, Goddess of Liberty! Hail, Goddess of Liberty! Please turn to America the Beautiful. 685. And we'll have our invocation. Lord God Almighty, we assemble this day beneath our vine and fig tree, our holy Christ self and our mighty I am presence. O great causal body of each one, thou the Dharmakaya, the great higher body of being, we call unto thee, we call to the mighty I am presence. Let the fruits of our tree of life be given according to the dictates of the lords of karma to those who would enter in and need our sustenance, our hand, and our support. In the name of the Goddess of Liberty and the Lords of Karma, we assemble this day to champion the rights of all people, their inalienable rights under Almighty God. We champion their right to freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom to assemble, freedom from every foe, every tyrant, every woe. We declare that freedom, O God, Let thy light shine upon us by the power of the spoken word, that we might forever enjoy that freedom of speech that does complete the mighty square of the foundation of our pyramid. O living light of the morning star, Sanat Kumara and Lady Master Venus, Helios and Vesta, Saint Germain and Portia, and all hosts of light, our dearly beloved El Moria and Lanello, we are grateful for your sponsorship, for your tremendous love, for the outpouring of dispensations from God the Father and God the Son that we have received. Dear God, let us live to show our gratitude to Thee in service, in self-giving, in love, and in the absolute God victory of freedom on this earth. We commend this planet into the very heart of Saint Germain, and we say, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. O God, hear our call in this hour. Come now into our hearts and liberate that life stream, that we might truly go forth, worthy to be thy Chelas. We celebrate this day and every day our declaration of independence from the fallen ones and all who have betrayed the light of the soul in all ages. We stand for the victory and the return of the Christ Jesus in glory. We stand for the great golden age of Aquarius and for the coming of Maitreya and his bodhisattvas. O God, thine is the victory on planet Earth. Ours is the vessel to decree it, and we do decree it. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and the Divine Mother. Amen.
to be seated. The title of my address is The Betrayal of the Common People by the Power Elite in the 20th Century. Historians will probably remember the 20th century as a time of great wars, great scientific progress, and a great struggle between free nations and totalitarian states. But they will discover a paradox. Even though the free nations had almost every advantage in the struggle, nation after nation fell under totalitarian control. This didn't happen by accident. It is the result of a plan carefully crafted by the power elite of this and other nations. Their goal was and is to establish what George Bush calls his New World Order, a totalitarian one-world government that the power elite intend to control, and no one is stopping them. In part 1 of The Betrayal of the Common People by the Power Elite in the 20th Century, I defined the power elite's key method of operation, managed conflict. I showed how they have used managed conflict to oppress the common people throughout the world. Common in the sense that Abe Lincoln used the term when he said, "The Lord must have loved the common people because he made so many of them." Common because we share the common light, the light of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I showed that the government of the United States used managed conflict to destroy the freedom of the common people in many nations. Their goal was to establish this new world order. I used the Persian Gulf War as a case history of managed conflict, and I showed how the leaders of the United States government have systematically betrayed Iraqis, their Kurds and Shiites, as well as the people of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Hungary, Cuba, China, Taiwan, Tibet, Korea, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Croatia, and Slovenia. In part 2, I will take up the power elite's abuse of the common people of the United States of America. The American people, as far as the power elite are concerned, are expendable, just as expendable as the common people of every other nation. When one American is sterilized against his will, it is the betrayal of all Americans. An indelible chapter of the U.S. government's record of infamy is a program of involuntary sterilization. There is no possible way to stretch promoting the general welfare to include such a policy. The involuntary sterilization of undesirable classes of people is something we associate with Nazi Germany. But it happened in the United States even before Hitler came to power. Between 1907 and 1964, more than 63,000 people were sterilized in 30 states which had sterilization laws. Anyone who was judged to be socially inadequate might be sterilized. And that meant anyone who was poor, blind, epileptic, physically deformed, or who was judged to be feeble-minded. This could also include those who were addicted to drugs or alcohol, or who were thought to have criminal tendencies. Under the model legislation used for most of these laws, the poet John Milton would have been subject to compulsory sterilization because he was blind. Beethoven because he was deaf, and Jesus because he was homeless and a ne'er-do-well. Those who were accused of being feeble-minded might have had perfectly normal intelligence. The IQ tests of the time were highly inaccurate. In 1927, when a Virginia law for forced sterilization was challenged, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in favor of sterilization. In a famous case, Buck versus Bell, the court decided in an 8-1 vote that Carrie Buck could be sterilized against her will because she was the potential parent of socially inadequate offspring. In writing his opinion for the majority, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes stated, "It is better for all the world if instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime or let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from breeding their kind." The principle that sustains compulsory vaccination is broad enough to cover cutting the fallopian tubes. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. End of the quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes. Researchers later demonstrated that not one of the 3 generations of Bucks, Carrie's mother Emma, Carrie, and Carrie's daughter Vivian, were imbeciles. In fact, Vivian was only 6 months old when a social worker determined that she was an imbecile. There was a final indignity forced upon Carrie Buck's family. Carrie's sister was sterilized without her knowledge. She was told she was having her appendix removed. More than anything else, she yearned to have children. Until late in life, she didn't know why she had never conceived. If there was anything the signers of the Declaration of Independence wanted to prevent, it was the arbitrary abuse of power by the government. It's hard to imagine a more arbitrary abuse than forced sterilization. Author Alan Chase, an expert on social biology, wrote, "Between the presidencies of Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt, we were led by presidents who advanced, sponsored, signed into law, and preserved legislation and policies aimed at the ultimate extinction of humanity's, quote, less suitable races or strains, unquote, such as the Jews, Italians, Hungarians, Poles, Russians, and other non-Nordic immigrants. The native-born white Anglo-Saxon Protestant poor and the even poorer native-born black Americans. These legislative acts of commission and omission ranged from immigration restriction and compulsory eugenic sterilization laws to the failure to support and enact critically needed public health programs such as universal and compulsory vaccination measures." End of quote. In 1942, the United States Supreme Court struck down an Oklahoma law that mandated the sterilization of some felons. They ruled that procreation is one of the basic civil rights of man. Yet forced sterilization has gone on in this nation. In the early 1970s, between 100,000 to 150,000 poor people were sterilized. Many of them were forced to either have a sterilization operation or to lose federally supported welfare benefits. So much for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of the poor and minorities? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people. Our founding fathers wrote in the Declaration of Independence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. This means that all men have the same rights, and political value, that no one is inherently superior or inferior, and that it is the purpose of government to make these rights secure. How did some of the most influential people in America reach a consensus in favor of eugenic sterilization? Would you like to know? Well, here's how it happened. In the 19th century, Francis Galton developed a theory of eugenics that influenced the power elite in the United States and Britain. Eugenics is the study of the methods to improve inherited human characteristics, chiefly by encouraging the propagation of the fit and discouraging the propagation of the unfit. Galton divided the population into 7 classes, each designated by a letter, based on their supposed genetic endowment. Galton said the people with the best genes, what he called the X class, were the rich and the powerful. He said that members of this class found great industries, established vast undertakings, increased the wealth of the multitudes, and amassed large fortunes for themselves. Those below the X class have a progressively inferior hereditary endowment. Galton said that blacks were genetically 2 grades below whites, and that Jews were specialized for a parasitical existence. Galton wanted to increase the population of the better classes and limit the population of those he called the less suitable races. His ideas found favor with the rich and powerful. Winston Churchill and Harold Laski, leader of the British Labour Party, and Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt were highly influenced by Galton. Galton's ideas were compatible with those of 19th century British philosopher Herbert Spencer. Spencer was a social Darwinist. He coined the phrase, survival of the fittest. Spencer argued that those at the top of the social ladder were there because they were superior. Those at the bottom were inferior. Spencer's 19th century admirers included railroad tycoon James J. Hill, oil baron John D. Rockefeller, and steel magnate Andrew Carnegie. They used Spencer's writings to defend their fortunes. Rockefeller told a Sunday school class, quote, "The growth of a large business is merely a survival of the fittest, merely the working out of a law of nature and a law of God." Those influenced by Galton and Spencer combined their efforts to achieve common goals. According to author Alan Chase, where Spencer offered evolutionary rationales for low wages and subhuman working conditions, Galton offered the hereditary reasons in the natural laws of biology for not wasting sympathy, money, education, and above all else, health care on biologically low-class types who were destined by the will of God and/or nature to be nothing but drains on society, and a rapidly proliferating population of hereditary paupers, thieves, and parasites. Together, from the era of the robber barons forward, the social Darwinists and the eugenicists started to press for compulsory sterilization of the mentally ill, the feeble-minded, the epileptics, the habitual paupers and criminals, and others with supposedly bad genes. The fallen angels in our midst are not so brazen as to propagate their theories in this decade. The people have come awake, and they would not stand for it. The fallen angels, who are the power elite, these Nephilim gods in our midst, are very careful these days to appear to be for the common people. Thus their lies are more deadly. The fact that Galton and Spencer influenced so many prominent Americans may help explain the U.S. government's attitude toward Jews fleeing the Holocaust. The State Department would not increase Jewish immigration quotas during the war, despite pleas from refugees and their families. And in 1939, it refused to grant visas to the 907 German Jewish refugees aboard an ocean liner called the St. Louis. The St. Louis sailed from Europe to Cuba, where it was turned away. Then the refugees sought asylum in the United States. The ship cruised up and down the coast of Florida, but the United States did not offer the Jews asylum. They would not allow them to disembark. The St. Louis finally had to return to Europe. There was no welcome to them in North America. Between 227 and 667 of those aboard died in Hitler's concentration camps during the war. The eugenics movement in the United States became an integral part of the population control movement, which played a key role in legalizing abortion. This is the very root of the beast. One of the leading eugenicists was Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. Sanger, John D. Rockefeller III, and others in the population movement worked for decades to create the proper political and social climate necessary for the legalization of abortion. The eugenicists' agenda is being carried out today through abortion. According to recent studies, 40% of American women who have abortions are non-white, and minority women ages 15 to 44 are more than twice as likely as white women to have an abortion. When one American is used as a guinea pig, it is a betrayal of all Americans. Certainly, our founding fathers did not intend that the government should use anyone as a guinea pig without his consent. Yet that's just what happened at Tuskegee, Alabama. From 1932 to 1972, the United States Public Health Service denied 400 black men treatment for syphilis so they could study the stages of development of the disease. They made them guinea pigs without their knowledge or consent. The Public Health Service never told the 400 black men that they had syphilis or that they were the subjects of a deadly experiment. They told them they were treating them for bad blood. They gave them a placebo instead of the medication that would have cured them, namely Salvarsan or later penicillin. The men remained infectious and transmitted the disease to their wives and children. They experienced a great deal of physical and mental suffering. Some of them died from syphilis. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of the poor and minorities? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people. When one American is exposed to mustard gas against his will, it is a betrayal of all Americans. Between 1943 and 1946, the United States Navy secretly exposed 1,700 men to chemical warfare agents, such as mustard gas. The Navy wanted to find out how good the protective clothing was. And as Time magazine reported recently, years later, when some of the human guinea pigs began to suffer from serious ailments, the Veterans Administration turned down their disability claims on the grounds that they couldn't prove that their conditions were service-related. That makes you wonder if this is still the government of we, the people. With enough pressure from Congress, the Department of Veterans Affairs finally decided that yes, mustard gas could cause bronchial and lung disorders, chronic conjunctivitis, and corneal opacities. As of this year, the VA will give veterans who were victims of the experiments a payment of up to $1,620 a month. But if Congress had not intervened, the vets would have been out in the cold. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of U.S. servicemen? Not if nobody's looking. Because in the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people, it's for the power elite. When one American is the subject of drug experimentation against his will, it is a betrayal of all Americans. No one intervened on behalf of Dr. Frank Olson, a chemist who on November 18, 1953, was given LSD by the CIA without his knowledge or consent. He went through a sudden change of personality. Within several days, he started suffering from delusions. Before he could be checked into a psychiatric hospital, he jumped to his death from the 10th floor of the Statler Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. It took Olson's family 22 years to learn the cause of his death. The CIA covered it up. Olson wasn't the only one given LSD and other psychedelic drugs by the CIA. In the 1950s and early 60s, many Americans were drugged without their knowledge under a super-secret program called MK Ultra. How many met the same fate as Olson? We will never know. Most of the files were destroyed in January 1973 by Richard Helms, then director of the CIA. Sometimes it seems like we have gone from government of the people, by the people, and for the people to catch-22. In order to protect all of the people, the government thinks it has to deny the inalienable rights of some of the people. When one American is exposed to deadly radiation, it is the betrayal of all Americans. Consider this. The Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, was established in 1946. It was charged with the responsibility of building America's nuclear arsenal. They allowed 15,000 American men to work in uranium mines full of deadly radioactivity without telling them the health hazards. The AEC knew all about the danger right from the start and suppressed it in the name of national security. Whose security? Not the 15,000 men who worked in the mines. Studies done in Europe in the 20s and 30s showed a link between the radiation in uranium mines and lung cancer. The studies also showed that ventilating the mines could reduce the threat. The Public Health Service also knew of the dangers, and in 1952 urged the AEC to ventilate the mines. But the AEC neither informed the miners of the danger nor pushed the mine owners to ventilate. The Public Health Service kept its mouth shut too. Years later, the miners started dying of lung cancer at 5 times the national average. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of miners? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is for the common people only when it suits the agenda of the power elite. When one American is victim of deadly radioactive fallout, it is a betrayal of all Americans. In the 1950s and early 60s, while the miners were digging uranium, residents of Utah, Arizona, and Nevada were being showered with deadly fallout from open-air nuclear tests. These downwinders, as they are called, were told that there was no danger from the explosions at the Nevada test site. In fact, the AEC actually invited people to observe the blasts. The downwinders may have thought the tests were safe, but the AEC knew better. They only allowed open-air testing when the wind was blowing away from Los Angeles and Las Vegas and towards sparsely populated Utah. The levels of radiation were so harmful that the AEC told their own radiophysicists in the field to decontaminate themselves when they returned from their checkpoints. But they didn't tell any of the communities like St. George, Utah, which received heavy doses of fallout, to take similar measures. Like the miners, the downwinders are suffering from high rates of cancer. Everyone agrees that the downwinders and the miners were wronged, but their struggle brings to mind Hamlet's famous complaint about, quote, the law's delay. In 1978, former Secretary of the Interior Stuart Udall sued the government on behalf of the miners and downwinders. The suit dragged on for 9 years. In 1987, an appellate court ruled that the government could not be sued. It was protected against legal action by, quote, sovereign immunity. The doctrine that you cannot sue the federal government for civil damages. The Supreme Court of the United States refused to hear the case. In 1990, 12 years later, Congress finally passed a law creating a trust fund to provide $100,000 for each of the disabled miners or their families. Most of the money will be used to pay huge medical costs. The disabled downwinders will each get $50,000 if they're still alive. The bill also contains an apology from Congress, an apology that will not bring back the dead or relieve the suffering. These are not isolated cases. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of the citizens of Utah, Arizona, and Nevada? No, not when it doesn't suit its interests. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people. When one single American is exposed to deadly radiation, it is a betrayal of all Americans. Fernald, Ohio, is a community of 14,000, not far from Cincinnati. Anybody here today from Cincinnati? From Ohio? There you are. But it has some of the highest cancer rates anywhere. Guess why? The Department of Energy has a nuclear weapons facility in Fernald. Between 1951, when the plant began operating, and June of 1989, when it shut down, the Fernald plant leaked 298,000 pounds of uranium dust into the air and 167,000 pounds of uranium waste into the Great Miami River. In addition, plant workers buried at least 12 million pounds of uranium waste in unsafe pits. Hamilton County, where Fernald is located, has one of the highest cancer rates in the country. The residents of Fernald sued for $350 million, but settled out of court for $78 million. There wasn't much else they could do. In court, the Department of Energy admitted that it knew all about the leaks right from the start, but kept them secret and did nothing about them. It also argued that it is a part of the federal government and cannot be sued. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of the people of Fernald, Ohio? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people. Between 1944 and 1957 alone, the Department of Energy's plant in Hanford, Washington, released into the atmosphere 530,000 curies of radioactive iodine-131, which Hanford officials knew caused cancer. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, 50 millionths of a curie of iodine-131 is the maximum permissible concentration that can be accumulated in the body without producing noticeable damaging effects. In 1949, the Department of Energy deliberately released 7,800 curies of iodine-131 in order to conduct a study. That's a lot of radioactive material. Only 15 curies of iodine-131 were released at 3 Mile Island. In addition, over a period of years, billions of radioactive hot particles escaped from Hanford's plutonium processing facility. The United States government kept this a secret. They didn't want to alarm workers or people in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho who might be harmed. After all, national security interests were at stake. Today, the downwinders near Hanford, like the unsuspecting people at Fernald, have high rates of cancer. The downwinders were not the only ones exposed to radiation without their knowledge. Construction workers who built the facility, soldiers who guarded it, and workers who operated the plant, all were exposed. Indians who fished the nearby Columbia River suddenly began dying of cancer at an abnormal rate. Even people who ate oysters caught from where the Columbia River flows into the Pacific have absorbed harmful doses of radiation. With all the statistics, it's easy to lose sight of the suffering that goes on in the lives of those who are affected. Listen to the story of Catherine Hamilton, a Hanford downwinder. In 1989, she wrote, "I was born in Yakima, Washington in 1944. My growing years were spent in the immediate neighborhood of Hanford. My father worked at Hanford as an electrician. We moved back to Grandview in April or May of 1946 when I was 2 years old and stayed on there. I attended high school there. I began to have thyroid problems in my late teens. My thyroid is now completely atrophied, shut down. I developed breast cancer at age 35 when my daughter was 10 months old. I was treated aggressively with surgery, chemo, and radiation therapy. I am glad to be alive to raise my children, but I suffer from permanently damaged health. As a result of my treatment for breast cancer, I have edema and nerve damage to my left arm and hand. I'm scared because I could now develop bone and lung problems and blood abnormalities because of the chemotherapy. Grandview was and is a very small town. It had a population of 3,500 all the time I was growing up. There were only 100 kids in my graduating class. These are some of the people near my age who I grew up with who have died of cancer. Linda Dobbs' little sister died of leukemia in the late 50s. Joe Terrell, my cousin's boyfriend, died of leukemia when he was 21. Suzanne Stevens died of abdominal cancer of unknown origin at age 39. My cousin's wife, Sharon Olmsted, died of breast and colon cancer at age 42. Cliff Wyckoff died of brain cancer at age 37. Kenny Wierst's brother died of cancer 2 years ago. And a boy a year behind me in school, can't remember his name, died of cancer just a few months ago. John Schofield has testicular cancer. There are even more. This is unusual." End of quote from Catherine Hamilton. Catherine was recently diagnosed as having terminal bone cancer. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of the working people of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people when the common people get in the way of the power elite's agenda. Besides the cost in human suffering, it will cost hundreds of billions of dollars to clean up the environment around the Hanford and Fernald plants. But there is one final betrayal here that affects us all. Ironically, the criminal disregard for human health in the name of national security may lead to unilateral nuclear disarmament. We may be less secure than if we had addressed the dangers of these weapons plants openly. In 1988, safety violations led to plant closures at the government nuclear weapons facilities at Hanford, Fernald, Rocky Flats, Colorado, and the Savannah River plant in South Carolina. As a result, the Navy has decided not to fully arm the long-range ballistic missiles carried aboard some of its new Trident submarines. Why? Because they don't have enough plutonium pits for the warheads. Those pits were made at Rocky Flats. So much for taking shortcuts to the common defense. If the government had protected the inalienable rights of the citizens of Hanford and Fernald to begin with, national security would not now be jeopardized. When one American prisoner of war is abandoned, all Americans are betrayed. The big debate for the last 15 years has been whether the United States abandoned 2,300 American servicemen in Vietnam after the war ended in 1975. There is an abundance of evidence that some, if not many, of these men are alive in prison camps in Vietnam, and that each succeeding administration has turned its back on them. But the problem is even worse than it appears. The United States has abandoned prisoners of war to the Soviet Union or its surrogates after 4 wars, going all the way back to the Bolshevik Revolution. Why do the Soviets keep our boys? Well, they use them as hostages to be ransomed back for cash, goods, and diplomatic prizes, to be milked for their technical expertise, or to be used in forced labor camps. Why do our leaders let them get away with it? That's a good question. In 1918, the United States sent an expeditionary force to Archangel, Russia, to fight the Bolsheviks. About 125 American soldiers were taken as prisoners of war. In 1921, the U.S. cut a grain for hostages deal under which the Bolsheviks were to return all Americans under their control. The Bolsheviks returned 100 Americans who had been living in Russia at the time of the revolution, but they kept the 125 prisoners of war. Diplomatic recognition was the price the Bolsheviks asked for their release. One American who was released reported that the POWs were rotting in prisons. In 1930, a Russian escapee reported that while he was imprisoned in the dread Lubyanka prison in Moscow in 1927, he had seen about 20 American POWs who had been there since 1919. He was later transferred to a forced labor camp on Solovets Island, where he met many American soldiers and civilians. In 1933, the United States finally recognized the Soviet Union, but we never demanded our soldiers back. The government's official explanation is that they were all killed in action and their remains were accounted for. After World War II, it was déjà vu. The Soviets seized about 20,000 American POWs that had been captured by the Germans. Major General Ray Barker, Eisenhower's chief POW negotiator, reported that these POWs were being held hostage by the Russians. The Soviets were bound by the Yalta Agreement to an immediate exchange of prisoners of war. But they held out. They wanted in exchange the return of Soviet citizens who had fled to the West, including millions of Ukrainians and Eastern Europeans. They also wanted diplomatic recognition of Soviet puppet regimes throughout Eastern Europe. And the Soviets demanded $6 billion from the U.S. for war reconstruction. The United States and its allies turned over to the Soviets over 2.2 million Russians and Eastern Europeans who had fled to the West. These people were remanded to Stalin against their will. In exchange, Stalin returned most, but not all, of the American POWs. Uncle Joe kept 20,000 Americans to use as bargaining chips. The families of these men were informed that they had been killed in action, but as reported by the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, the daughter of one such U.S. Army officer, Major Wirt Thompson, was never told that in 1955, a German repatriate from the Soviet concentration camp system reported to the United States government that while he was in prison, he met Major Thompson. The German repatriate told American officials that Thompson told him that he had been imprisoned at Budenskaya prison near Moscow, and also in the Taychet labor camp after World War II. Not only was Thompson's daughter overwhelmed when she found out early in 1991 that this information existed, but she wondered how her family could have been told by the United States government in 1944 that Major Thompson had been killed in action, body not recovered. Author M.G. Brown, an expert on American POWs, writes, according to once top-secret U.S. documents, decisions were first made by President Franklin D. Roosevelt and then by President Harry Truman that the potential losses of a 1945-46 war with Russia were not worth the possible recovery of some 20,000 American and 20,000 or more British and Commonwealth POWs. Roosevelt wanted Soviet participation in the defeat of Japan and support for the United Nations. He betrayed 20,000 Americans and 2.2 million Russians and East Europeans for these dubious political gains. In 1945, America could have marched in and taken those prisoners of war home. Russia did not have the ability to move against this nation. This is an example of the power elite cooperation, East and West, that Saint Germain calls the international capitalist communist conspiracy. From the White House to the Kremlin, this conspiracy continues. We abandoned our men after Korea, too. Most of the 8,000 American soldiers listed as missing in action were alive. Some of them may have ended up in prison camps as far away as Siberia. Did we also abandon our men in Vietnam? We've had numerous live sightings. The United States government has an established track record of betrayal. But until we actually get one back, we won't be able to say for sure. And then maybe we still won't know. When one did come out, Marine Private Robert Garwood, in 1979, after 14 years of captivity, he was promptly court-martialed as a deserter. That way, the government didn't have to acknowledge he was a prisoner of war. But that doesn't mean there are no POWs in Vietnam. There almost certainly are. In 1973, President Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger made a secret deal with the North Vietnamese. They promised to give them around $4 billion in war reparations, but Congress refused to allocate the money. According to a Republican staff report of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the North Vietnamese apparently were waiting for the reparations that Kissinger promised them before the vast majority of American POWs were repatriated. Doubtless they held the prisoners back as human collateral. What has been our policy since then? According to George Bush, resolving this problem is the highest national priority. But Colonel Millard Peck, a highly decorated Vietnam veteran and former head of the Defense Intelligence Agency's office assigned to account for the POWs, says, the mindset to debunk is alive and well. When he resigned as head of the Special Office for Prisoners of War and Missing in Action on February 12, 1991, he said that the government did not want to know the truth about any POWs. Instead, he said, the principal government players were interested primarily in conducting a damage limitation exercise. It appears that the entire issue is being manipulated by unscrupulous people in the government. A cover-up may be in progress. The entire charade does not appear to be an honest effort and may never have been." End of quote. In 4 wars, our government asked our men to fight for our principles, our Constitution, our way of life. And this is how they treated them. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of the members of its armed forces who have defended freedom on foreign soil? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people who shed their blood for Uncle Sam. If this is what the United States government does to our finest, what will it do to those it doesn't care very much about? Let's see. In the midst of this expose, I would like to ask you to stand and stretch and sing with me, "God Bless America."
While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home sweet home. God bless America, my home sweet home.
Thank you. Please be seated. When one American is forced into prostitution, it is a betrayal of all Americans. As we betrayed our soldiers to the Viet Cong in the jungles of Vietnam, so we are betraying our teenagers to prostitution rings in the jungles of our cities. Tens of thousands of American teenagers are forced into prostitution each year. Many are runaways who were sexually abused at home. Some are middle-class children who have been captured by catchers. The catchers take pictures of them in compromising positions, threaten to kill members of their families if they try to escape, and then sell them into prostitution rings. The rings often move the prostitutes from state to state in a huge circuit, from Los Angeles to Portland to Seattle to Alaska to Hawaii and back to Los Angeles. For these children, getting an education is not a priority. Staying alive is. What's the government at the local, state, and federal level doing about this? Absolutely nothing. They are not making a concerted effort to go after these prostitution rings. Mary Francis of Children of the Night, a private organization that helps teenagers escape prostitution, says, "They are not doing anything to solve the problem. They just deal with the individual kid if they're picked up. A teenager picked up for prostitution is likely to be back on the streets in a matter of days or weeks." Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of its teenagers? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for minors. When one American is born addicted to drugs against his will, it is a betrayal of all Americans. Every year, illegal drugs cost Americans more than the entire Vietnam War, according to Dr. Joseph D. Douglas, Jr. Every year, over 23,000 Americans die because of drugs. Every year, 375,000 babies are born addicted to drugs. Every year, Americans put $100 to $200 billion into the pockets of drug suppliers. Yet we're not winning because we're fighting the war the wrong way. We like to believe that drug kingpins are behind the trafficking. But our government ignores the evidence that governments of Mexico, Costa Rica, Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia, Burma, Lebanon, and our Gulf War allies, Syria, are corrupted by drug money. Furthermore, high-level defectors have confirmed that the governments of Laos, North Korea, Cuba, Bulgaria, and Nicaragua engage in and profit from narcotics trafficking as their official state policy. Even though drugs are costing America more than the Vietnam War and far more than Desert Storm, our war on drugs continues to be waged not by the military, but by law enforcement. Of course, we need more prevention. We need more drug treatment. We need to rehabilitate criminals. But you don't win a war by defense alone. You have to put some muscle into your offense. Law enforcement would have a lot better chance of stopping drugs coming over the border from Mexico if they had access to intelligence from military satellites. But they don't. And that's just part of the silly, half-hearted way that the Reagan and Bush administrations have waged the war on drugs. Congress created the Office of National Drug Control Policy as a focal point for developing a national drug war strategy. Bush appointed a drug czar. He's a general with no army and no money. Until our government gets serious about fighting them, drugs will remain one of the greatest threats to the common people's life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I've been saying for 20 years that we should engage the National Guard, the U.S. Army, the Air Force, Navy, and Marines in full force on the drug war, along with the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S. Customs. If our government really wanted to win this war and save our youth, they would mobilize our entire armed forces and get the job done. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of its citizens? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people. The First Amendment to the Constitution states, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." We, the people of the United States of America, are guaranteed the freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to assemble and petition for grievances that are listed in the First Amendment. One of the most fundamental rights is freedom of religion. The intent of the provision that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof was to keep the federal government from making any one religion the state religion. It was also designed to keep government from interfering with an individual's freedom to worship God according to his conscience. When one American is denied his freedom of religion, it is a betrayal of all Americans. The federal government, in its persecution of the Unification Church, has infringed on that freedom. On May 18, 1982, Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his financial advisor, Takeru Kamiyama, were found guilty of tax evasion and conspiracy. Moon served 13 months in prison, and Kamiyama served 4. In 1991, Carlton Sherwood, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, published a book called Inquisition: The Persecution and Prosecution of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon. Sherwood found that the Justice Department, after years of receiving complaints and huge amounts of political pressure, all aimed at running the Reverend Sun Myung Moon out of the country, had ended up being coerced into prosecuting over the repeated oral and written objections of the department's most experienced criminal attorneys. In short, Moon had been prosecuted not because he had done something wrong, but because of political pressure. Sherwood started his investigation with the assumption that Moon and Kamiyama were guilty as hell and deserved exactly what they got. He found an entirely different story. He says by just about any standard, the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and his followers had done nothing wrong, certainly nothing worthy of criminal prosecution. The Unification Church, its leaders and followers were and continue to be the victims of the worst kind of religious prejudice and racial bigotry this country has witnessed in over a century. Sherwood says, moreover, virtually every institution we as Americans hold sacred, the Congress, the courts, law enforcement agencies, the press, even the Constitution itself, was prostituted in a malicious, oftentimes brutal manner as a part of a determined effort to wipe out this small but expanding religious movement. Here are some examples of a government prosecution gone amok. Kamiyama was convicted of perjury following testimony before a grand jury. He speaks no English and was given a Japanese translator who was totally unqualified for the job. After the testimony, the government prosecutor had the transcript analyzed by a professional Japanese translator. The translator found over 600 errors in the translation, 75 of which directly affected the perjury charge. But the prosecutor suppressed the report, overrode the grand jury's doubts by telling them that the interpreter had done a credible job, and went on to prosecute Kamiyama for perjury. As a direct result of the abuses in the Kamiyama case, the U.S. Congress passed an amendment in 1985 reforming the Court Interpreters Act. It didn't affect Kamiyama's sentence, however. He had already served it. The amount of money involved in Moon's alleged tax evasion was about $7,000. The government refused to allow him to simply pay the money. It wanted a show trial, and its purpose was to destroy an unpopular religion. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of members of unpopular religions? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the common people. When one American is denied his freedom of religion, It is a betrayal of all Americans. On Good Friday this year, we saw the culmination of another government attempt to destroy an unpopular religion. Swami Bhaktipad, the leader of New Vrindavan, the Hare Krishna community in West Virginia, was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. The conviction was the result of a 4-year, $10 million investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Martinsburg, West Virginia. But the conviction was a travesty of justice. Sri Bhaktipad was convicted on 5 separate criminal conspiracy counts under the federal racketeering statute, RICO. Among them was conspiracy to commit murder. In 1983, an ex-member of the community, Charles St. Denis, was murdered by a second ex-member, Daniel Reed. Reed claimed that St. Denis had raped his wife. According to the Krishnas, the U.S. Attorney used strong-arm tactics to get Reed to testify that Sri Bhaktipad had condoned the murder. They told Reed that he would get a lenient sentence if he would testify against Sri Bhaktipad. Otherwise, they would send him to jail for the rest of his life. Reed testified against Sri Bhaktipad and got 2 years for the murder. He is free today. Here's what happened. According to Paramahansa Krishna Swami, who attended our Freedom 1988 conference in the Heart, Reed asked Sri Bhaktipad if, according to Hindu scriptures, a man can kill one who rapes his wife. Sri Bhaktipad replied that it is the old Vedic law, but in 20th century America, it is a heinous crime, first-degree murder, and that Reed should put the idea of violence out of his mind. Reed conveniently told the jury that Sri Bhaktipad answered yes to his question, but failed to tell them that Bhaktipad told him not to commit violence. Sri Bhaktipad was sentenced to 30 years in prison for allegedly condoning the murder, while Reed got 2 for committing it. This was clearly a case of the government attempting to destroy an Eastern religious community. Sri Bhaktipad was also convicted of copyright violations because the community gave away caps, bumper stickers, and T-shirts with copyrighted logos in exchange for donations. The government coerced the man in charge of the sales operations to testify against Sri Bhaktipad by telling him, "If you don't testify against the Swami, you're going to be in jail for a long time." It is not hard for a prosecutor to prove there is a conspiracy under the RICO law. The prosecution has only to prove that the defendant should have known or would be in a position to have known that illegal activities were taking place. While the copyright charge had substance to it, it is very rare for a copyright charge to result in a criminal conviction. New Vrindavan had already reached an out-of-court settlement with the owners of the copyrights. The government went overboard in this case because they wanted to get New Vrindavan. The U.S. Attorney William Calabash used the case to further his political ambitions, according to Paramahamsa Swami. After the verdict, there was a party in the office of the U.S. Attorney and his assistants. A drunken chant echoed down the halls of the courthouse. "Good Friday, Good Friday, good day for a crucifixion." The Akashic record shows, and divine justice decrees, that Sri Bhaktipad is not guilty. Our entire community is profoundly grieved at this denouement of this trial, and we continue to pray for our brothers and sisters in this community. Because as a result of this trial, the government may be in a position to take over the entire New Vrindavan community, since under RICO, the government can confiscate property obtained with money from, quote, racketeering, in this case, the copyright violations. The Krishnas plan to fight to keep their community. Let us help them in that fight by offering our dynamic decrees and continued support for their right to freedom of religion in America. Does the United States government protect the inalienable rights of Eastern religions? No. In the USA today, the Declaration of Independence is not for the Hare Krishnas. I would like to offer a few remarks about RICO. The Hare Krishna case is the first use of RICO against a religious figure. RICO stands for Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. It is a law originally designed to convict mafia leaders. Constitutional scholars opposed its passage because it compromised the rights of all Americans to due process of law. In the last few years, RICO has been used by couples suing each other in divorces, and according to the Wall Street Journal, among the 1,000 or so cases filed in the past year are companies suing each other as racketeers for claims they made in pet food advertisements, and a California lawyer who sued the city of Huntington Beach as a criminal enterprise for giving him 3 speeding tickets. Congress is considering reforms to RICO. There is no doubt that this law is a serious violation of our civil liberties. It shows what happens when people allow their rights to be eroded for a good cause, in this case, stopping organized crime.